Om Satyena Labhyastapasa Hyesatma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nityam Antaha Sharirehi Jyotirmayo Hishubhra Yam Pashanti Yatayaha Kshinadoshaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The Atman, the indivisible self in all beings, is realized by austerity, veracity, right knowledge, concentration, and moderation. When the impurities of the mind dissolve due to this practice, the seer beholds it, the Atman, everywhere and in everything, even here in this very life and mind and body. Om, peace, peace, peace. That alone is self-effort, which springs from right understanding, and which duly manifests clearly in one's own heart, which has been exposed to the teachings of the scriptures and the sacred presence of the holy ones. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all living beings. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. That last chant, which I can't do in Sanskrit yet, but it is from Yoga Vashishta. It's one of the new set of the 7 by 10s that Babaji gave us. And it's very pertinent to today's class because it talks about the right understanding, which manifests clearly in one's own heart. And this is that disappearance of false superimposition in one way of looking at it. It's also, the disappearance of ignorance. And it manifests clearly in one's own heart that has been exposed to the teachings of the scriptures and the sacred presence of the holy ones. And it's through these that not only do we gain the knowledge of what the nature of reality and the nature of the self is, but it also gives us the methods, the various methods. And in the case of the holy atmosphere of our teachers, as well as the scriptures, then we imbibe that atmosphere that makes it easier for us to engage in the discrimination necessary. And all of this will be part of what we talk about today. So we are embarking on verse 17 of the Encomium in praise of the excellence of self-effort. And let me give a share on that. So here's that verse. Sedulously, I engaged the power of analysis and reasoned well in my mind about the 5 sheaths, and then happily detached from them, using the 2 methods of discrimination indicated by my teacher. So that word sedulously, for those of us who may not be so familiar with that word, that means with great perseverance and probably enthusiasm, and then engaging the power of analysis and reasoning. These are what we bring to this teacher of the 5 koshas. Now, admittedly, especially for those of us who are here in this class in person or live during it, everyone's heard about the 5 koshas many, many times. But we're going to go into it in some depth and do it in less in terms of information, but more in the spirit of using the teachings surrounding each of these koshas or sheaths that can be used in reasoning and analysis, which are those 2 methods of discrimination that our poet is mentioning here, are Adyaropa and Apavada. And I don't know about you, but I've heard that term Apavada for years and years and years. And in certain senses, it's remained a little bit vague, but in the course of preparing for this class, it's sort of like the meaning of it has been hiding right out in the open. So let us begin. So let's bring up Babaji's chart, the very basic beginner's chart of this. Oh, and I also had another comment. So in this day and age, when we learn about the five koshas, we are definitely learning it from the standpoint of these are the coverings over the psychophysical being, and that we want to detach from them, or we also want to see them as vehicles for consciousness and be free of being acted on by them, but be like, the puppeteer that directs the show with them. But it's often, the teaching is often given in the negative because rightly so, we have a lot of emphasis on Vedanta in the way that Shankara has presented it. And, from his time, and even more so up to our time, the need to remove the ignorance about the nature of the self, or even the presence and existence of the self, capital S, of the Atman, the existence of Brahman, and the fact that these two are one. These, the level of ignorance has been so dense that we tend to just look at these sheaths as something, we've got to get rid of these. And it's true. However, back in the old days, at the time of the ancient rishis who were writing the Upanishads, or speaking out the Upanishads from their direct experience, there was a more familiar way. People at that time were not so ignorant. They were not so detached automatically from the presence of their self. And society was a bit homogenous and very organized around realizing the self and realizing Brahman, and doing sacrifices to prepare the mind for this. So in the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is one of the more ancient ones, we find that they take a look at each of these sheaths and see that the one that's next to it in terms of subtlety is the embodied soul of the more gross one. So in other words, in the physical body, in the Annamaya kosha, the next one up in subtlety is the Pranamaya kosha, and it's considered as the embodied soul of the Annamaya kosha. And then the embodied soul of the Pranamaya kosha is the Manomaya kosha, the sheath of the mind, and so forth. So they practiced, the word is upashanas. They did worship with contemplation. It's a beautiful combination of worshipful contemplation on the sheaths in a way that was not about rejecting them, but increasing the ability of the aspirant's mind to dwell on more and more subtle levels of their existence until they arrived at the Atman within, one with Brahman. So it reminds us a little bit of, in the practice of yoga, Patanjali yoga, that we begin with what's more gross. We begin by concentrating on the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and ether. And then we graduate to what's next subtle, which is the senses. And then we go to the subtle elements. And then from there, we jump off and we start to meditate on the mind itself and the ego and the ahamkara until through the practice and over time, and also with grace and concentration, we arrive at the ability to focus on the non-dual reality alone. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that there was a different perspective in the before times. So let's take a look at this first chart, old warhorse chart, and just kind of remind ourselves of it. And then we won't spend a lot of time. We'll move on to some other charts, because the main deal is how we use these in analysis. So here we have it. We have going from the inside, from the inside, the most subtle is the Atman. And these arrows indicate that Atman and Brahman are one. And the Atman appears to be an individual only because of the presence of these sheaths, which are false superimpositions on the Atman. Instead of seeing the Atman, instead we are seeing and experiencing these sheaths. And then the next most subtle, which creates the first sense of separation, is the Anandamaya kosha, or the sheath of bliss. And it's called the sheath of bliss as opposed to, say, avidyamaya kosha, the sheath of ignorance. It's called the sheath of bliss because it's that bliss, not the ultimate bliss, but it's that bliss that we tap into as the essence of the Atman, and we then experience it in a state of separation. So, without the Anandamaya kosha, there would be no joy, happiness, pleasure in embodied existence. That's one aspect of it. And we'll go a little more deeper into this in the way that Shankara explains these. Now, the next less subtle is the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of intellect, which we're familiar with. And even though sometimes we offhandedly refer to the Anandamaya kosha as the sheath of ego, it's really the sense of a separate I, and not ego in the way that we normally think of it. That arises in the Vijnanamaya kosha. And that's where we get the sense of agency and the sense of ownership around knowledge, objects, etc. And then the next less subtle is the Manomaya kosha, the sheath of the mind. And we should say the manas in particular here. And this sheath is extremely interesting and powerful. It when it runs amok, it just leads us into more samsara and the plethora of objects, and attaches, makes us attached through desire, etc. It creates the objects. This is a very important sheath. Then the next less subtle is the pranamaya kosha, the sheath of vital energy. And in particular, it's talking more about what it does to the annamaya kosha. It empowers the senses, it empowers the body, the external senses, the flaps of skin, etc., the limbs, etc. So then, like I was telling you from the Taittiriya Upanishad, this pranamaya kosha is the embodied soul, so to speak, of the Annamaya kosha. Then the Manomaya kosha is the embodied soul or essence of the Pranamaya kosha. And if you think about that, that makes a lot of sense because the mind impels the prana. Now, the trick here, the issue here is it happening consciously or unconsciously? Because again, these are all insentient and they're being powered by higher mind, by the Vijnanamaya kosha, hopefully more informed by knowledge of being the Atman. And if we are asleep at the wheel, then it may seem that prana is just doing its own thing, but it's coming out of samskaras. And those are tendencies, habits of thinking. And you could say from an unconscious level or an instinctive level. All right, then the Vijnanamaya kosha is the embodied soul of the Manomaya kosha, and it doesn't get to truly express itself fully unless we have ripened the Manomaya kosha, right? So then the embodied soul of the Vijnanamaya kosha in this rendering is the Anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss. Now, those of you who have been who are members of the SRV Wisdom online ashram, there was a God blog by Babaji last week called the three states, and Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya, was the example being used that he had three states. In one, he was able to chant the names of the Lord. And in the next one, he could only dance in ecstasy. And in the last one, he was in samadhi. And Sri Ramakrishna explained that as in the first state where he's chanting the names of the Lord, that he's connected into the physical and the Annamaya kosha and the Pranamaya kosha. And then where he's, oh no, I'm getting that a little bit mixed up. He's in the subtle body and the Vijnanamaya kosha. That's where he's centered there, not the physical body. And then in the place where he's dancing in ecstasy, he's in the causal body, which is another word for the Anandamaya kosha. And many of us probably think, well, there's nothing there. How could he be present enough to be dancing in ecstasy? Well, he's not speaking, that's for sure, but it shows us how that all these, the most subtle sheath is progressing through each more gross sheath. And so a being with the kind of mastery that Sri Ramakrishna, Lord Chaitanya, and others have, they have access to all of these in their purest form. So what we see here, and this is also something that's stated in the Upanishads, is that from this Atman, all of this evolves outward from subtle to gross. And then in the process of involution, where, as we'll see, we're working on Ajiropa and Apavada, we will be, which is two forms of discrimination, then we begin to discriminate away from the physical sheath to the pranic, to the Manomaya kosha, to the Vijnanamaya kosha, through the Anandamaya kosha to the Atman. So here's discrimination about the sheaths from gross to subtle, enables the soul to perceive its true nature. And then we're to think of these sheaths as like floating on Brahman. They're false superimpositions on Brahman. And which is the one unchanging reality. And it is called Atman when seen in association with these koshas. And then these layers float, as it were, in the infinite ocean of pure consciousness, the ultimate reality, in which time, space, and all levels of existence reside. So to learn more about these, you can go into the Viveka Chudamani and visit and study verses 150 through 211. So then, let's see, where are we going to go next? Okay, let's take a look at the next chart. So this is going to introduce to us this 1-2 punch of Ajaropa and Apavada. So most of this we've already gone through, but I wanted to give it a different, a different visual look. We've already talked about the bliss sheath, intellect sheath, etc. And here we have an arrow showing how each sheath infills the next from gross to subtle. So by the time we get to the Annamaya kosha, all of these are present, because whatever is more subtle permeates everything less subtle than it. And what is most subtle of all is Brahman Atman. And maybe you can see that like a watermark behind all of this. That's the one thing I didn't put here, was the Atman. So, oh, I did. That's right. See this white line here? Section. The immutable, ever pure Atman is the transcendent and immanent self that pervades and supports all the sheaths. Atman and Brahman are one, like water in an open jar immersed in the ocean. So even though this Atman, symbolized here by this white transparent line or column, it really pervades all of it. Don't think of it as just coming up through the center. But in a sense, this is the way we experience when we get that intuition of the Atman within us. We feel it in the heart center, not in the anatomical heart. And yet there is this expansive feeling that we feel in the chest. So it's, we definitely feel it in the body, but it's not in the body, so to speak. But they, in the Upanishads, the rishis talk about it like, in the cave of the heart, or in the sky, which means akasha here, in the akasha of the heart. But it's that subtle heart. Now here, this arrow rather, represents that sense of separation, that sense of separate I. It really gathers speed as it hits the Vijnanamaya kosha. And notice, each one of these is more dense, so to speak, than the one before. I know I keep saying that, but this is an important piece of this. The I sense permeates all the sheaths. And in so doing, it confuses the unwise about the true nature of the self. So there's an insight here, which is that if we don't ripen these, if we don't learn to take our identity, our sense of identification off the Annamaya kosha, off the Pranamaya kosha, off the Manomaya kosha, the Vijnanamaya kosha, then this sense of I, identity, this sense of selfhood, then gets stuck in each one of these, to the point where I think I'm a body, or I think I'm my energy, or I think I'm the mind and intellect. So this is the value of going beyond that sense of separation. And then, another view from the Upanishadic rishis out of the Svetashvatara Upanishad. Oops, I misspelled that. This divinity who created the universe and who pervades everything always dwells in the hearts of creatures, being finitized by emotions, intellect, will, and imagination. That describes pretty much the subtle body. Those who realize this become immortal. So now we're going to shift over to the practice. So we've heard about Ajaropa for years, most of us here. Ajaropa is that power of discrimination that locates the presence of delusion in the mind, such as misconceptions, old personal beliefs. Those misconceptions include the fact that I'm not the body. That's a misconception, that I'm the body, or that I am my emotions, or that I am a particular gender, or I'm a role. I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, I am my work, the role I have at work. All of these things are misconceptions. When we come to Vedanta, we are told that we are the Atman, and that the Atman is one with Brahman. Brahman is non-dual, and that, this is to be realized. So we're given that up front, and then we have to work our way towards it. And some of us may have had the experience, say, early on in the presence of our teacher, of suddenly getting an aha moment, or maybe it even happened to us while studying a scripture, where we suddenly took on the mind of the rishi or the teacher, and we actually felt that. So, but then the old habits come back. And so the aspirant is held back from the essence of spiritual life by these. Now, I'm going to read something from a chapter that Babaji wrote about Ajaropa and Apavada, starting with Ajaropa. And he gives a really good analogy that I've sort of alluded to here. So kind of settle in for a minute. It'll take a couple of minutes to read this. To give an example of this dark area of the mind where these misconceptions are residing, and this will illustrate a point brought up earlier, a spiritual aspirant who is still a novice and an adherent to a new religion as well, speaks and acts as if the laws of karma and reincarnation are known and accepted by him. But in his mind, and despite all good intentions, this person still holds to a subtle residue of belief that he has only one life to live. Deep in his heart, he does not really believe in reincarnation, though outwardly he professes it. Further, though he has heard from his spiritual teacher that he has a perfect and ever pure nature within him, his mind in some way continues to think that he is really imperfect, a sinner. And for this is what was taught to him all the years of his life as he was brought up. In short, he is still identifying with his limitations, his preformed ideas of who he is instead of who he truly is. In a way, it is natural, for those earlier concepts may have been suited to his level of growth at the time and have only recently become antiquated and of no further use, and are in truth now inhibiting progress. Now, the next paragraph, which continues in this theme, is is how this is about dealing with samskaras. Given this example, it will take a strong method of discipline married to some powerful self-effort to rid the mind of this type of detrimental thinking. What this person is experiencing, Ajaropa forms a part of that discipline, the proverbial one in the old 1-2 punch. What this person is experiencing is what Vedanta calls vivarta, false superimposition. Only in this case, it is in the area of individual existence or individual concern. An erroneous or outmoded concept has been insidiously layered over his mind and its thinking process like a smothering blanket, and has over time entered the subconscious regions of the mind and caused an impression there. This impression, called a samskara in Sanskrit, will become both an accepted principle, and I've got this underlined, okay? So because this has been layered into his mind over lifetimes of being raised with this very idea, it's become like a smothering blanket and entered the subconscious regions of the mind and caused an impression there. And this impression has become an accepted principle and a code to live by, and will be further reinforced by all the actions he will perform under its regime for years to come. So think about how we have some knee-jerk thoughts and experiences that come up, that when something happens to our body, maybe something very serious that could change our experiences for the rest of our life. We think that that's happening to us. It's knee-jerk. That's one of those very, very deep samskaras. And our actions and are influenced by that, or think that that if I do good deeds, I'll get to go to heaven. And if I do bad deeds, I will have to go to hell. And this becomes a code to live by. And by this, even though we have rid the mind of such things as lying and cheating and stealing and violence even, and we have pulled in our senses, practicing moderation. Even though we have come to that point, we are still held back by the gold chain of thinking that these are the causes of heaven and hell. And that limits our ability to step out of duality. And it's just one example. So Babaji goes on. Let me just back up here so we're still in the flow. This impression, called a samskara in Sanskrit, will become both an accepted principle and a code to live by, and will be further reinforced by all the actions he will perform under its regime for years to come. And remember, all of these limited and dualistic ideas create karma and regroove those samskaras. Whether it is entirely false, this impression, or a mixture of truth and falsehood is somewhat beside the point. It will have to go eventually if non-dual truth is to make its appearance there. It is now a matter of how long will it take to remove any given samskara-based concept or assumption from the subconscious mind, given all the time and force that has coalesced in order to plant it there to begin with. So if you remember, we've shown this chart a few times. Let me pull it up. here's the 3 levels of mind, and here's the condition of samskaras. We're just going to pretty much look at this section. And we have in the unconscious region where these samskaras are, they can be dormant or overpowered. Dormant because there's nothing going on in our life that is prompting them or watering them to come up. Overpowered because we're doing something else that kind of squishes it down. But attenuated, this is what, as yogis, in the sense of practitioners, as well as the attained, the attenuated state is only achieved through spiritual practice, which is only useful, like was said by Patanjali, if our practice becomes firm, then and only then, if it's maintained and observed for a very long time, will we attain this attenuated result. So when in the conscious mind, in our waking state, a samskara comes up, then we say that it's expanded. And when we're able to bring it into a superconscious state, still in the sabija, which means that we still have a sense of subject and object going on, or I and other, then if we're able to deal with these in a state of lower samadhi, then they get transformed. So in this expanded state, this is where we get a chance to really look at them. And this is why Babaji would often say that one of the important aspects of holy company is that we get support for dealing with these. Or if we see it come up, or something's come up and we don't understand it, and we talk about it with our teacher, then it gives us an opportunity to then engage in adhyaropa and apavada. Okay, so we've looked at adhyaropa, the power of discrimination that locates the presence of delusion in the mind. And now apavada. This is based on clarity, joined to self-will and effort. And it consists of refutation of that wrong thinking, and rejection of it, or negation. And as Babaji puts in that chapter, he describes it as the natural breakdown of the old and outdated based upon new comprehension. Vedavyas, in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras, he says, he calls the flow of apavada khyati, which is clarity, dharma mega, which is the rain cloud of virtues, and prasada, which is a clarity that you get to keep. So initial discernment, the rising of virtue, and the birth of clarity. So there was something I meant to prepare. Give me a moment here. Here we go. Yeah. So there's a scripture by Shankara called the Panchakaranam. And it's an interesting title because it's really kind of like a condensation of the Mandukya Upanishad about the 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya. But a sage by the name of Sri Sureshvara wrote a commentary in Sanskrit. That in this case, it's called a Vartika. And he says about this apavada, that by virtue of something being unreal, it is liable to elimination by the comprehension of the identity of Brahman and Atman. So let me see if I can, there was more to it than that. Let me see if I can find it real quickly. Okay, here it is. Yeah. So here's that first quote by Sureshvara. By virtue, any case of Vivarta, by virtue of its being unreal, it is liable to elimination by the comprehension of the identity of Brahman and Atman. And again, this is what Appavada is giving us. So the translator for Sureshvara gives us a footnote, and he says, unreal means wrongly imputed to the Atman, right? Remember, the Atman is the substratum of everything. It's there before any form of manifestation, and it's there after manifestation dissolves, which means it's the only thing present during the state of manifestation. So anything that we see is actually a false superimposition over Atman. All wrong imputations, i.e. Ajaropa, vanish at the dawn of the knowledge of the real nature of the thing. When a rope is known to be distinct from the snake in a rope snake, the snake then is said to be unreal. It is neither in the rope nor elsewhere. Where is that snake? It's not in the rope and it's not elsewhere. The rope does not actually change into a snake, but only appears to be so, an illusion caused by ignorance. This is called the Vivartavada theory, the only pivot on which the structure of the Advaita Vedanta philosophy stands. As a snake is the Vivarta of a rope, so is the universe the Vivarta of Brahman. This illusion, consisting of only name and form, can be removed only by the knowledge of Brahman. The removal of the illusion is called Appavada. So this is a different way of hearing Appavada a little bit from what I've been used to, because it's like I've been thinking of Appavada almost like a verb, right? Okay, we're going to do this refutation, we're going to do this analysis, but it also means the result of that when it reaches its culmination where Atman and Brahman are realized. And so it also is important to say at this point that when the nature of the rope is known, is seen, then one doesn't see the snake anymore. And so the same thing, and we see this in the great ones, that once they have realized Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi and have become established in that, then when they come back to relative consciousness, those who do, then it's like Sri Ramakrishna said to Swamiji when he asked him, "Sir, have you seen God?" And he said, "I see him more clearly than I see you." Or Swami Shivananda, who would see the deities. Now, this is a little more relative, but still, who would see the deities before he could really see the individual standing before him coming for darshan. So this is a wonderful thing to contemplate how these great beings, having realized the ground of existence, then always see that shining through. Like Sri Ramakrishna, again, talking about how when he went to the wax museum, and I guess they had lights in them, he said that was the way he saw everything was, Brahman was that light shining in everything. The name and the form, because he had relative consciousness, was there, but Atman was shining through very, very clearly. So let's finish the rest of this chart over here. Some of it is a repeat. So There is something imposing itself. This is the primary issue when we are working on sedulously developing our analysis and reasoning over the five sheaths, say. There is something imposing itself erroneously over that which is pure and natural. Call it ignorance, delusion, illusion, or by any other name. It spoils the perfection of life and existence and creates more of itself along the way. And that's a very important statement here. This is, again, from that chapter Babaji wrote. And when you hear that, it creates more of itself along the way. You can see how how Tantra in it, in that delineation of the 16 evolutes of Maya, that, or excuse me, rather in the malas, when Tantra talks about, is it the malas or anyway, I think all of you remember that chart of the 16 evolutes of Maya, that one of the last characteristics, whether it's a mala or something else, is that it generates more of itself. So Tantra put a name on it, and I think Babaji perhaps has woven that in. But once we are in this habit of projecting name and form all the time, because remember, that's coming out of our Manomaya kosha, that because of that way of thinking, which is habitual, which is a samskara, that then our actions partake of it, it creates more karma, digs in this samskara, and it just creates more of itself. That's one way of looking at it. Now, I just realized that one of the more important charts of today, I hadn't even brought up yet. So here we go, because this is going to help us with the Appavada reasoning and analysis in terms of the five sheaths. So we're going to start from the gross. Now, this is also taken from the Viveka Chudamani. Let's begin with his quote here. Being enveloped by the five sheaths, the Atman does not manifest. If these sheaths are taken away, the Atman manifests. Ever pure, eternal bliss, unchangeable, direct, and self-luminous. So this is a lot of detail that some we may know some of it, but maybe we don't know all of it or have forgotten. If our study of the Viveka Chudamani has been a while back. So the Annamaya kosha, the sheath of food or matter, this body sheath is a transformation of food. It lives by food and it dies without it. It is made up of skin, bone, flesh, and marrow, etc. It cannot be the Atman. Okay, here's where we go. Here's the analysis, the refutation. It cannot be the Atman, which is unchanging. The body is insentient, an object for the senses. And that includes the mind. Yeah, we can touch our skin, we can touch our external senses, the internal sensory ability of the body to feel what some of the organs are doing, whether we're hungry or not. That's partly the pranamaya kosha helping us, and the mind is one of the senses. So all of that means, the fact that we see all of that means that it is the seen and it is insentient. It is a non-enjoyer. It is material, undergoes change, borrows its life, has various attributes, and is controlled. It has a cause, and itself causes ignorance and identification with the unreal. Now, remember what we were saying about how that separate I sense works its way through all of these, from here all the way down. It works its way, from here all the way down. This Anandamaya kosha, sheath of bliss, the sense of a separate I, works its way all the way down into the Annamaya kosha. So it causes ignorance and identification with the unreal. So there is something else here. It's an object, it is a non-enjoyer, because the only enjoyer is this, well, is the upper reaches of, well, the Atman in its highly purified state, let's put it that way. But if you'll think about those images of Shiva and Annapurna, and Annapurna represents the Divine Mother who bestows everything, not just rice, but everything, all phenomena, anything that is an object. She is bestowing that on Shiva, personification of ultimate reality, who is the only enjoyer, right? So from Samkhya, remember also the Purusha is the only enjoyer, and all of Prakriti is there for the experience of the Purusha. So now the Pranamaya kosha, the sheath of vital energy. It consists of the 5 organs of action and the 5 vital forces, dwelling in and permeating the Annamaya kosha. Remember, it's the embodied soul of the Annamaya kosha. Dwelling in and permeating the Annamaya kosha, it engages beings in all works. It moves like the wind, inside and out, so is not immutable like the Atman. It has no knowledge. It also is insentient, and it doesn't know the difference between good and bad. Okay, so here's that Manomaya kosha. This one is, if you haven't come across these teachings before, you take notes. Or actually, you can see this chart in Footfalls. It consists of the organs of feeling and the mind. So the Gyanendriyas, the seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, all of those. It infills the other 2 sheaths and thinks itself separate from the others. Why does it think itself separate from others? Because that bliss sheath comes all the way down. And that sense of, and it comes through the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is the seat of agency and I and my. So that permeates the Manomaya kosha. It depends on the 5 senses for its knowledge. So it's always outward going. That's why we talk about this manas as connecting that part of the mind that is connected to the senses. It retains its existence and interest via sense life, objects, and desire. It is the very home of ignorance and the cause of all bondage. It causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power. It binds the soul to the body and objects via attachment and frees it from them via non-attachment. It gets purified. It gets itself purified by resort to discrimination and detachment renunciation, which is a factor, I would say, from my understanding, that when we think of the Vijnanamaya kosha as the embodied soul of the Manomaya kosha, then, we want to tap into that, because that's where we're really using our discrimination and detachment. Because with the Manomaya kosha, it's sending all this, it's telling the prana to go out through the senses to the objects. It's getting its knowledge from that, but it's not making any decisions, so to speak. It's still activated by desire, by attachment, by karma, but the decision-making process is up in the Vijnanamaya kosha. So it gets itself purified by resort to discrimination and detachment, i.e., starting to withdraw itself from the senses, from the objects of the senses. And it deludes itself by creating objects, varieties, distinctions, qualities, and belief in them. It undergoes change, has a beginning and an end, suffers pain, and is not the seer. So again, don't lose sight of the fact that this is how we're going to engage in the Appavada portion of the two methods in terms of the five koshas. So these are all our clues. Take it into your contemplation and dwell on this. So then the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of intelligence, it consists of the buddhi, the intellect, the organs of feeling, and the sense of I am the doer. It reflects consciousness. They say it, and it's the closest to the Atman, even though the sheath of bliss is still more subtle. Still, they say that it's the reflector of the Atman, even better. It reflects consciousness, and that's a capital C, but it is a transformation of nature. It's a sheath, right? It's a container for consciousness, a vehicle for consciousness. It works, feels, and says, I am the doer, I am the knower, I am the seer. It engages in works and enjoys their results. It holds within it the three states of consciousness and pleasure and pain. It is the upadi of the Atman and very near to it and reflects it best. The Atman uses mind and intellect for its appearance. And then finally, the Anandamaya kosha. And as Babaji was saying yesterday when he was talking about the deep sleep state, which the Anandamaya kosha is correlative, can be correlated to, there's not quite so much to say about it. It is a reflection of bliss, but it is reflected in the tamas of Maya. That's why we don't remember it. It's like a negative memory. Not negative as in unhappy, but negative as we remember that we felt well, but we don't know. We felt wonderful, but we don't remember anything about it. It appears, and this part's very interesting and is worth a lot of contemplation. It appears and is felt only in favorable conditions and circumstances. Okay, it has a lot to do with sattva. It has a cause, for it requires good actions to be operative. It is not to be mistaken for the Atman, as it is dependent on something else. In other words, on favorable conditions and circumstances in order to feel it. And it also depends upon the Atman. So it's not self-existent. It cannot be the Atman. And it's still a container. So it's insentient ultimately, even though it's so close. It is not to be mistaken for the Atman, as it is dependent on something else. It is experienced in deep sleep, glimpsed in waking and dreaming upon the fulfillment of desires. Now here we're talking about ordinary people. Not so much, because we had that example from Sri Ramakrishna of Lord Chaitanya, who was dancing in ecstasy in the bliss of the causal body, which again is the Anandamaya kosha. It always remains with the body under the control of the gunas. So there you have it. All right. Well, this was hopefully not too much to take in, and we've overshot our time. Let me close with a prayer. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahoy Tejasvi Naviditamastu Ma Vidvi Shavahoy. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.